On the phone with you right now is someone who brought this to Parliament yesterday, Liberal MP for Beaches East York, Nathaniel Erskine-Smith. Good morning, Nathaniel.
Good morning.
So, okay, right now, what was it you brought up to Parliament yesterday?
I introduced two bills yesterday, one to decriminalize the simple possession of drugs for personal use, to treat it as a health issue, and another that would change policing so that instead of arresting people and moving forward through the criminal justice system, rather than decriminalization fully, it would divert people out of the criminal justice system and into the health system as much as possible.
Now, right now, what would you say is the biggest problem with the way we're handling our opioid crisis?
So the number one problem from the federal government's perspective is that we have this public education campaign to address the stigma associated with drug use and that gets in the way of people seeking treatment as a huge barrier. But the number one stigma in our society is the criminal sanction to begin with, and we have not adequately addressed that.
Okay, now what does decriminalization of all drugs mean? I get people texting me right now already saying, absolutely not, no way. What would this look like? I mean, people are thinking they're going to be heroin lounges around here the way we did with cannabis, but this is much different.
Right. No, I mean, cannabis is about treating Canadians like the responsible adults that they are. It's very different. Decriminalization of drugs in the context of the opioid crisis is about saving lives, and it's not about trafficking. It's not about producing. There will still be laws on the books to criminalize those activities. This is about people who are drug dependent, in need, and they need to make sure we as a society should be, rather than punishing them and pushing them away from treatment and further marginalizing them, we should be making sure that they get the help that they need. And that means treating drug use as a health issue, which means removing the criminal sanction.
Now, this also, I heard someone mention this, and I don't know, this isn't the exact right thing, I don't think anyway. They're saying if somebody is in the throes of addiction on the street, let's just say they do have a small amount for personal use of whatever type of substance they're using, someone said rather than throw them in jail and give them a criminal record, should they instead, and I want to know how you feel with this, be admitted into a rehab center depending what kind of state they're in? Is that something that's even remotely ethical?
So in Portugal, what they do is rather than ensuring someone attends before a criminal judge and whacking them with a criminal penalty and potential jail time, an individual caught with possession of drugs just for personal use, they're brought before a social worker, a health professional, and a legal professional. And while the majority of cases are suspended and disappear because they're not serious, in some cases they're encouraged to go to treatment. And the evidence that we have, and it's pretty overwhelming evidence, is that mandatory treatment doesn't work. People have to be in a position to want to go voluntarily for it to be successful. So the second bill I introduced, which I think is likely to be the more successful one, is along these lines, which is to say when the police officers catch someone and pick someone up with drugs for personal use, they have an option to give a warning, and they have an option to refer someone to a health provider to help the individual in need, rather than immediately sending them with a charge before the criminal justice system.
What are the chances you think of something like this passing? This would be a major overhaul, and do you think it would be asking a lot more of our police service?
So it would actually, in many ways, be asking less of our police service. Right now, I don't think police officers want to be wasting their time chasing people for simple possession. There are really serious public safety issues and public wrongs that the police officers in our society have to concern themselves with. And so if pure decriminalization, I think just politically, I've introduced this previously, I've spoken to this previously, and I have found it's challenging to convince people. People are scared of the word. And so what I look to with the second bill that I introduced, which I think is more likely to be successful, is evidence-based diversion. And the idea is, again, sort of the Vancouver and Victoria policing model. They don't want to, again, waste their time, waste judicial resources in our justice system for simple possession and people in need. And so instead, it diverts people out of the system and provides an off-ramp, really, so people can move out of the criminal justice system and into our health system.
Now, I know I forget if you mentioned, you said evidence-based approach to drug policy. Where else has these types of bills been effective? You mentioned Portugal, I think, was one. And what types of change have they seen?
There are a number of countries that treat drug use in a much less punitive way than we do here in Canada. Portugal is the model that we have the most evidence with respect to. And in Portugal, the numbers that are really standout are the fact that drug use didn't increase in any notable way. The number of overdose deaths significantly decreased. And the number that has always stood out to me is the number of people seeking treatment increased by 60%. Because, again, the stigma associated with seeking treatment is bottoms out in the criminal sanction. And if we remove that and we stop treating it as a criminal issue and stop pushing people out of the healthcare system and marginalizing them, people will get the help that they need, and fundamentally, we will save lives.
Right. It really, and that's what it's about too. Now, what about regulation of drugs? Because we're hearing about so many overdose deaths. Would there be any law about the regulation of drugs as well? So then you could crack down on people who are illegally selling and distributing.
Yeah. So often when we talk about the opioid crisis, I think one conversation that needs to be had, and that we've had this morning, is about the stigma and criminalization. Another aspect, though, is about a clean supply and an uncontaminated supply. And we're seeing pilot projects in BC right now funded by the federal government, which are really important because the vast majority of deaths that we've seen in the context of the opioid crisis have been the result of a contaminated drug supply. And the more that we're ensuring that people in need have access to a cleaner supply and an uncontaminated supply, the better off our society will be, and the more lives we'll save.
Now, you said government-funded program in BC. What does that program look like? I mean, just general terms.
It's a pilot project where individuals who have a prescription from their physicians are able to go to effectively an ATM-like machine, and they're able to dispense a clean supply of drugs for personal use, and to ensure that they're not seeking out the same substances on the black market that are likely to be contaminated and likely to cause great harm.
Wow, and how is this program being received as far as success rate? I have not heard of this.
It's just begun, so it's a pilot. It's a pilot and an experiment to see, is this model that can potentially be successful and be expanded upon. But the government is very much seized with this issue of how do we ensure that there is an uncontaminated supply for people who are in need? How do we, and really in the end, it's a harm reduction issue. We know it's impossible to stamp out drug use. So how do we ensure that we're reducing the harms associated with drug use as much as reasonably possible?
One more question before I won't keep you, but I mean, I'm getting the text right now, and I'm sure you hear it all the time. I just got a text in. Someone said, it's wrong, wrong, wrong. They're breaking the law. Stop pandering to the needs of the people making these choices. How much time do we waste as far as arrests, incarceration of people who are arrested for personal use? Are there stats on that? How much time is wasted?
There are thousands of charges every year that are wasting police officers' time, and then ultimately wasting a judge's time and wasting staff time in our criminal justice system. There are very serious offenses in our society where we see months and months and years go by very slowly charging and convicting individuals of much more serious offenses. And the more that we save taxpayer dollars and clear out the issues from our justice system that frankly aren't public wrongs. There are two types of people who use drugs. The people who use drugs recreationally and can function in our society, and people who are drug dependent and it's a healthcare issue and they are in need. And in neither case is the criminal penalty effective in reducing use.
Right, and that's what we have to focus on, I think, here. Why are we treating it like a crime instead of a health issue?
Yeah, I mean, if there is a policy prescription that can save lives and save taxpayer dollars, I'm not sure why we aren't pursuing it with greater force. Absolutely.
It's just a matter of changing the direction and changing perspective. I really appreciate your call this morning. It's such a fascinating and interesting and delicate topic, too.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. That is Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, Liberal MP for Beaches.